History tells you that 300 Spartans died at Thermopylae to save Greece. But what history forgets to tell you is what happened to the men who killed them. We thought the Spartan war machine died in the mud with their king. We were wrong. Because when the morning mist burned away, 10,000 of his brothers were waiting for us. And they didn't come to defend Greece. They came for revenge.
My name is Arash. I am a spearman of the Achaemenid Empire. To understand the nightmare we walked into, you have to understand the absolute arrogance we carried with us into that valley. For a year, we had been the undisputed lords of the world. We marched over the butchered bodies of King Leonidas and his 300 men in the narrow pass of the Hot Gates. We left their bones for the crows and swept southward like a plague of locusts. We burned their holy temples to the ground. We sacked the great city of Athens, pushing its people into the sea. I remember standing on the hills, leaning on my spear, watching the great Acropolis burn in the night. The sky was choked with ash, and the heat of the burning city warmed our faces. We thought we were the end of the world. We thought Greece was a corpse just waiting to be buried. Our god-king Xerxes had grown bored of the conquest. He returned to Persia, leaving behind his greatest general, Mardonius, and a massive army of 300,000 men to finish the job. We had the legendary Immortals. We had tens of thousands of heavy cavalry. We had archers whose volleys could literally blot out the sun. We thought the remaining Greeks would simply kneel in the dirt and offer us earth and water. But as we marched into the plains of Boeotia and stared across the muddy banks of the Asopus River, the laughing stopped.
Mardonius told us the Greeks were cowards, a fractured alliance of farmers and politicians who would turn on each other the moment they smelled our campfires. But the men in the front lines, the men like me who had actually fought in the meat grinder of the Hot Gates, we knew the truth. We knew what that dark red cloth meant across the valley. They wore red so their enemies couldn't see them bleed, and standing on the right flank, anchoring the entire Greek army, was a solid, unbroken wall of bronze. We didn't bring enough men to fight 10,000 of them. You have to understand the terror of fighting a Spartan. Other men screamed to build their courage. Other armies banged their swords against their shields, chanting to their gods, charging blindly to hide their own paralyzing fear. The Spartans do not speak. They do not chant. They just stand there in the suffocating heat of the Greek summer, wrapped in 80 pounds of bronze and oak, waiting for the order to kill you. For over a week, neither army moved. The tension was a physical weight crushing our chests. The Greeks wouldn't cross the river to attack us, knowing our cavalry would tear them apart in the open water. And Mardonius, for all his arrogance, wasn't foolish enough to send us uphill into that bronze wall. It was a standoff in hell. The days dragged into a torturous waiting game. The sun was directly overhead, beating down mercilessly on the dry, cracked earth. The smell of 300,000 unwashed men, horses, and rotting refuse hung over our camp like a thick fog. Disease was beginning to spread. The anxiety of staring at that silent red line across the valley was driving men mad. Mardonius decided to break them slowly. If they wouldn't bleed on our spears, he would make them choke on the dust. He unleashed our heavy cavalry. They didn't attack the heavily armored infantry, they bypassed them entirely. Thousands of Persian horsemen rode deep into the Greek supply lines, slaughtering their baggage trains and hunting down their foragers.
But worse than that, they found the Gargaphia spring. It was a small, bubbling pool of fresh water, but it was the only source keeping 100,000 Greeks alive in this sun-baked wasteland. We watched from the hills as our cavalry descended on it. We choked their water with mud. We slaughtered their water-bearers and threw the rotting, bloated corpses of our dead horses directly into the spring. We poisoned the only thing keeping them standing. We cut their supply lines completely.
For days, no food reached the Greek camp. From across the valley, we could see the Greek infantry collapsing from heat stroke and dehydration inside their heavy armor. Men were dropping in the dirt, too weak to hold their shields. Mardonius smiled as he watched them suffer. He told us they would break by nightfall. He told us they would run. And he was right. That night, under the cover of a pitch-black moonless sky, we heard the sounds of absolute panic. We heard the clatter of dropped weapons, the shouting of confused and terrified commanders, and the desperate shuffling of tens of thousands of men retreating into the dark. The Greek alliance was fracturing under the thirst. They were abandoning their positions. We celebrated in our camp. We drank wine, sharpened our blades, and laughed at the cowards fleeing into the hills. We thought the war was over. When the sun rose, the center of the Greek army was completely gone, fled into the foothills like frightened sheep. Only the Athenians remained on the far left and the Spartans on the far right, completely isolated from each other. Mardonius saw his chance to end Greek history forever. He didn't bother forming up the ranks. He didn't bother with a strategy. He ordered a full, disorganized, all-out charge. No formations, just a chaotic, screaming sprint of 100,000 men rushing across the river to slaughter the stragglers. We ran across the muddy water of the Asopus, screaming for blood. Our adrenaline was surging. We thought we were running toward a massacre. We thought we were going to butcher exhausted, starving men in the dirt. We didn't realize we were running into a trap. As we closed the distance, charging up the uneven ground, the Spartans didn't retreat. They didn't panic. They didn't even draw their swords. We stopped out of spear range and unleashed our archers. Thousands upon thousands of arrows left the bows. The sky turned entirely black. The high-pitched whistling sound of the volley was deafening, like a terrible wind tearing through the valley. But the Spartans just raised their massive heavy shields, locked the bronze rims together, and sat down in the dirt. They sat there while our arrows rained down on them like a violent hailstorm. They were waiting. Their general, Pausanias, was standing completely exposed in the middle of the storm, ignoring the arrows shattering against the rocks around him. He was staring intensely at a slaughtered goat on a stone altar, waiting for the priests to read the omens from the gods. Men in his ranks were bleeding. The arrows were finding the gaps in their armor, piercing calves, biting into unprotected arms. But they didn't scream. They didn't break rank. They didn't even flinch. They just held the line, bleeding in silence, and waited for permission to kill us. We set up our wicker shields in the dirt like a woven fence and kept firing, laughing at how easy it was. We thought they were paralyzed by fear. We thought the great Spartans were just waiting to die. Then the arrows stopped, the quivers were empty, and the flutes began. It was a haunting, eerie sound cutting through the battlefield noise, the slow, rhythmic, chilling melody of bone flutes echoing off the mountainsides. The priests nodded. The omens were good. The Spartans slowly rose from the dirt as one single, terrifying entity. That terrible music that used to keep their marching pace began to dictate the heartbeat of the battlefield. 10,000 men stepping forward in perfect, synchronized rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. The ground beneath our feet actually began to vibrate. Our front line braced for the impact, gripping our short spears and wicker shields. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a fishing net. Our light armor was entirely useless against the sheer, crushing weight of their heavy bronze and dense oak. When the two lines collided, the air was violently forced out of my lungs. The man in front of me was instantly crushed backward, his ribs snapping under the pressure as the Spartan phalanx drove forward without breaking stride. A mist of blood sprayed across the shining bronze. They didn't fight as individuals. That is the secret of the Agoge. They fought as a massive, grinding, soulless machine of muscle and metal. You couldn't even see the face of the man killing you. just a wall of overlapping bronze, the terrifying pressure crushing the breath out of you. And then a heavy ash spear thrusting out from the dark, perfectly aimed at your throat. The heat inside the crush of bodies was suffocating. The smell of copper, sweat, and opened stomachs made me gag. I was being pushed backward by the weight of my own panicked men, trampling over our own wounded just to get away from the bronze wall. I watched my friends being systematically slaughtered by a completely silent, expressionless wall of red. They were stepping over our dead without a single hesitation, their spears working like pistons in a gruesome engine. I saw men who had conquered the known world, weeping in the mud. Mardonius, our great and arrogant commander, realized his army was disintegrating. He charged them on his white horse, surrounded by his elite bodyguard, desperate to break their line and save his honor. He thought his presence could inspire us to push back. A Spartan hoplite picked up a heavy, jagged rock from the blood-soaked dirt and hurled it. It caught Mardonius directly in the skull. The great Persian general fell from his horse, his head crushed before he even got within striking distance of the Phalanx. When Mardonius fell into the mud, the soul of the Persian army shattered. We broke. The greatest military force on earth threw down its weapons and ran like terrified children. We ran for the wooden barricades of our camp, our lungs burning, praying they would stop at the river, praying they would be satisfied with the victory and the dead we left behind. But they didn't stop. They didn't hold the line anymore. They broke formation into a full, terrifying sprint, their red cloaks flying behind them like a river of blood in the wind. They chased us across the muddy water. They chased us into our own camp. They tore down our tents, smashed our barricades, and slaughtered us where we stood. There was no mercy. There was no taking of prisoners. We had come to conquer Greece, but we had woken the most terrifying war machine the world had ever seen, and now we were locked in a cage with it. I didn't make it to the camp. I dove into the thick reeds of the muddy riverbank, burying myself in the freezing water, trembling uncontrollably. I breathed through my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, the muddy water stinging my eyes. Through the stalks of the reeds, I watched a single blood-soaked Spartan slowly walking through the carnage. He was missing his helmet. He was bleeding from a gash on his shoulder. But he wasn't rushing. He was just methodically walking through the bodies, his heavy spear in hand, driving the iron tip into the throats of the wounded Persians writhing in the mud, ending their lives one by one. History says the Spartans died to save Greece, but sitting in that freezing mud, listening to the screams of my dying brothers, I knew the truth. Leonidas and his 300 didn't die at Thermopylae. They just multiplied, and they made us pay for every single drop of their blood. Thank you for surviving another brutal chapter of the past. If you want to experience more of history's most terrifying realities, subscribe to Echoes of History and step into the front lines.